Journalists, on the other hand, shouldn't have what you called a glass jaw when it comes to some of these investigations, citing the First Amendment and threats to the First Amendment.
Well, the First Amendment is a critically important part of the Constitution. It is not unconditional.
There is a particular kind of authority that only comes with age, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice, doesn't need a camera pointed at it, and certainly doesn't need a publicist to craft its words. Tom Brokaw, born February 6, 1940, in Webster, South Dakota, now carries that authority the way a retired general carries his posture. Quietly, permanently, and with the full weight of history behind every syllable. He anchored NBC Nightly News for 22 years. He was a man standing at the Berlin Wall in November 1989, reporting live as one of the defining moments of the 20th century unfolded in real time beneath a cold German sky. He wrote The Greatest Generation, a book that didn't just sell millions of copies. It reframed how an entire country thought about sacrifice and duty. Tom Brokaw doesn't speak casually. When he speaks, people stop. And lately, the man who helped define American broadcast journalism has been speaking up about the woman now holding the fort at the network he gave his life to, Savannah Guthrie. And what he has to say is worth paying very close attention to. For years, there was a certain unspoken tension between the era Tom Brokaw represented and the era that replaced it. The old guard of network news, serious men with serious voices who delivered serious facts to a serious nation, watched with complicated feelings as morning television evolved into something more emotional, more personal, more willing to laugh at itself. Brokaw built his reputation on the evening news, a format that operated like a cathedral service, structured, dignified, and completely non-negotiable. The Today Show, by contrast, has always lived in a different register. It is loud and warm and caffeinated. It asks its host to interview a Secretary of State and then immediately taste test a new flavor of pie. For a long time, veterans of the Brokaw School would have viewed that kind of programming with polite skepticism at best. But something has shifted. At 86, battling multiple myeloma, the blood cancer that has forced him into a wheelchair and into the care of home health aides in Manhattan. Tom Brokaw has clearly done the accounting that serious illness demands. He has decided what matters and what doesn't, and among the things that matter is giving credit where it is genuinely due. Savannah Guthrie is not a figure who arrived at the Today Show desk through luck or legacy. Her path was constructed from two entirely different professional worlds, and the unusual combination of those worlds is precisely what makes her exceptional. She was born in Melbourne, Australia in 1971. Her father was a mining engineer stationed there, and raised in Tucson, Arizona after the family returned to the United States when she was 2 years old. Her father died when she was 16, a loss that shaped her deeply. Her mother, Nancy, who would later become a beloved presence on the Today Show itself, stepped back into the workforce to keep the family afloat. That early education and resilience, watching a woman rebuild a life under pressure, never left Savannah. She pursued journalism at the University of Arizona, graduating cum laude in 1993, and began her career the way almost everyone in this business does, at small stations, doing the difficult, unglamorous work that nobody watches and everybody needs. What separated Savannah from most of her peers was a decision she made in her late 20s that almost nobody in television makes. She went back to school, not for a weekend seminar or a professional development course. She enrolled at Georgetown University Law Center and earned her Juris Doctor, graduating magna cum laude in 2002. She scored first place on the Arizona bar exam. She then worked as a litigation associate specializing in white-collar criminal defense at the prestigious firm Akin Gump Strauss Hauer and Feld. This is not a person who stumbled into prominence. This is a person who built two separate, demanding careers from scratch and then figured out how to combine them into something the television industry had genuinely never seen before. When she returned to journalism as a legal correspondent for Court TV in 2004 and then joined NBC News in 2007, she arrived with a toolbox that no amount of journalism school can replicate. She understood not just how to ask questions, but how to construct a line of questioning. The way a prosecutor builds toward a verdict, patiently, brick by brick, until the entire structure of a subject credibility is either standing or in rubble. Tom Brokaw understands that quality the way an old carpenter understands a grain of good wood. In his years anchoring NBC Nightly News, he prided himself on being a reporter's reporter, not just a face behind a desk, but someone who had stood in war zones, who had knocked on doors, who had done the sweating and the traveling and the waiting that real journalism requires. He covered the Watergate scandal. He reported from Vietnam. He was one of the big three, alongside Peter Jennings at ABC and Dan Rather at CBS, a triumvirate that collectively served as the conscience of American broadcast journalism for 2 decades. What that era demanded above all else was accountability, to the facts, to the story, to the audience. And when Brokaw looks at Savannah Guthrie conducting an interview, what he sees is someone who holds those same standards, expressed in a completely different vocabulary. The moment that truly defined Savannah Guthrie's character for the nation came not during a landmark interview or a breaking news exclusive, but during one of the darkest mornings in the history of the Today Show itself, when Matt Lauer, the man who had co-anchored the program for over 20 years and whose name had become synonymous with NBC's morning franchise, was terminated in November 2017 following allegations of serious workplace misconduct. The show was left reeling. The audience was bewildered. The institution was shaking. And Savannah Guthrie, sitting at that desk with co-anchor Hoda Kotb, did something that the previous generation of broadcast journalists had been trained never to do on live television. She was honest about her feelings. She acknowledged she was heartbroken and confused. She did not hide behind professional distance. She told the audience that she was processing this news the same way they were, in real time, and that was a choice that required far more courage than projecting calm confidence would have. It was a moment that the Savannah Guthrie era truly began, not because she had a title or a time slot, but because she demonstrated that the audience could trust her to be straight with them even when the truth was uncomfortable and the circumstances were deeply personal. Brokaw has been observed reflecting on that quality in Guthrie with genuine admiration. For a man of his generation, the temptation would have been to view emotional vulnerability on air as a failure of professional discipline. In his era, the anchor was supposed to be the calm center of the storm, the person who held themselves together so that the audience could hold themselves together. But the world Savannah Guthrie operates in is not the world Tom Brokaw built his career inside. The modern news audience does not want a secular priest behind a granite altar. They want someone who makes them feel seen. They want someone whose coffee is occasionally too hot, and whose kids occasionally make them late, and whose heart occasionally breaks over the same things their heart breaks over. In Savannah, that is not a performance. Her openness about her journey to motherhood through IVF, having her daughter Vale and son Charlie later in life, her candidness about balancing an extraordinarily demanding career with the reality of being a sleep-deprived parent, these are not public relations strategies. They are the truth of her life, shared generously. Brokaw recognizes that what once would have been considered a weakness has, in the current media landscape, become the most powerful form of credibility available. There's also the matter of physical courage. People who watch Savannah Guthrie on television every morning may not fully appreciate what it cost her to keep showing up. In 2019, she suffered a serious eye injury after a freak accident involving her son and a toy. The damage required multiple surgeries. She faced weeks of uncertainty about whether her vision, in a career that demands presence and precision in front of the camera every single morning, would ever fully return. She came back to the desk wearing glasses, looking exactly as human as any of us would look after that kind of ordeal, and she told her story. She did not pretend it had not happened. She let the audience interfere, and by doing so, she demonstrated something that cannot be manufactured. She is genuinely unafraid of her own vulnerability. Brokaw, who has spent the past decade managing his own very public health battle with multiple myeloma, an incurable blood cancer that has progressively limited his mobility, understands that particular kind of courage in his bones. The generational conversation happening between these two figures, even if much of it is taking place at a distance, is ultimately about what journalism is for. In Tom Brokaw's era, journalism was a gate. The people behind the desk decided what the country needed to know and delivered it with authority. There was a distance built into the relationship between anchor and audience, and that distance was considered not just acceptable, but essential to credibility. The anchor's private life, personal struggles, and emotional interior were considered irrelevant to the work. What mattered was the information, delivered cleanly and without interference from the self. That model produced giants. It produced Brokaw, Jennings, Rather. Figures of enormous historical consequence who helped the country make sense of assassination and scandal and war in the long, slow unraveling of the 20th century. But that model also had costs. It kept the audience at arm's length. It created pedestals. And pedestals, as any architect will tell you, are fragile things. Savannah Guthrie tore the pedestal down deliberately and replaced it with a kitchen table. Her version of today is a conversation, not a broadcast. She brings to it the intellectual firepower of a Georgetown-trained litigator, the narrative instincts of a journalist who has covered everything from presidential campaigns to Supreme Court nominations to the death of Osama bin Laden, and the emotional availability of someone who has never confused toughness with coldness. She can sit across from a sitting president and press without flinching. She covered the 2008 presidential election traveling with the Sarah Palin campaign, contributing to coverage that earned her team an Emmy. She has interviewed Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and everyone in between with the same methodical patience she presumably learned in those white-collar criminal defense depositions. And then she can turn around and talk about her kids with the same ease. That range is not something journalism school teaches. It is something a complete human life produces. Tom Brokaw spent more than 5 decades at NBC. He is one of the only people to have hosted all 3 major NBC news programs: The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and Meet the Press. Wikipedia, he has seen every generation of journalists come through those halls. He has watched trends rise and collapse. He has watched formats that seem permanently become extinct within a decade. When a man with that perspective quietly signals his respect for someone currently doing the work, it carries a weight that no ratings number or industry award can replicate. It is the kind of validation that only comes from someone who has no agenda left, no contract to protect, no competition to manage, no brand to maintain. At 86, fighting a disease that has taken most of his mobility, Tom Brokaw's only remaining currency is his honest judgment. And his honest judgment, formed over a lifetime at the center of American journalism, is that Savannah Guthrie is the real thing. What connects them, finally, is not the building they both worked in or the network whose logo appears behind them, but something quieter and more durable. The understanding that the job, at its core, is about showing up for the truth even when it costs you something. Brokaw showed up for the truth in war zones and political crises.